You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast, a proud member of the Anazal Podcast Network. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Captivate, and Apple Podcast. You could join them on one of those networks, or you can support the show by making a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the show's description.
1 Corinthians 11:17 through 22 in the Christian Standard Bible say, "Now in giving this instruction I do not praise you, since you come together not for the better, but for the worse. For to begin with, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. Indeed, it is necessary that there be factions among you, so that those who are approved may be recognized among you. When you come together then, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For at the meal, each one eats his own supper. So one person is hungry while another gets drunk. Don't you have homes in which to eat and drink? Or do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What should I say to you? Should I praise you? I do not praise you in this matter." So in this pericope, St. Paul describes how the church should behave and act, or how the church, should behave and act in their communities, and the church ordinances, therein. So, Professor Moreland, why do you think Paul describes the communion as something so vital for the unity of the church in this passage?
So, it's incredibly important that people be physically present with one another to break bread and to be able to experience each other's faith journey and community.
Yeah, I like that. Hey guys, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast, back with another round table discussion. It's not been that long since the last one. Usually we spread these out a little bit, but we had some vital concerns that came up in that last episode, and just excited to get back into it. So I'm Joshua Knoll. My purpose is to introduce people, even though I can't speak or remember how to introduce people. TJ just can't afford anyone else. He stopped using money. So for those who don't know, TJ Tipper-Swan, greatest podcaster of all time. That whole thing where Star Trek realized life's better without monetary means. He just decided to stop using money ahead of time.
Currency's lame, fiat or otherwise.
Yeah. So we are here though, with some awesome guests, returning to the round table, Pastor Matt Thrift of a Mennonite Brethren Church that I forget the name of in Kansas somewhere. I assume that he's the pastor of Clark Kent's parents, probably.
I wish. Yeah, that'd be pretty awesome. But happy to be here. Kerner Heights Church, Newton, Kansas.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Also here, of course, returning is Pastor Joe Day. He is a home church leader. He is a regular pastor. He is a master of the mystic arts. He taught Doctor Strange, built Iron Man's first suit, also dabbles in Christian mysticism and wears toboggans. That last one's probably the most important one. Welcome back, man.
Good to be here.
Yeah. I still think I missed one that I said earlier before we recorded. I had a crazy list. Joe's the only person I know who does more stuff than me. So I'm just that list is just longer each time, guys. We are also here today, return guest, but I think maybe his first time on a roundtable episode, the one and only Professor Christopher Moreland. He is a women in religion and other religion things professor at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Devout Catholic and guy with a pretty cool haircut right now. I think it's different from last time I saw you.
It is. Thank you.
Welcome back, man. Yeah. So that's who's here. The reason we are here, we're going to get to a little bit later. Joe brought up something I mentioned in the last episode about the difficulty of sacrament and taking sacraments from afar. And I was like, part of what makes us need to come together is sacraments. And I think he's going to challenge me on that idea. So we're going to talk about that. Not entirely sure exactly the route this conversation will take, but it's going to be a fun one. It's going to involve sacraments, and it's going to involve the need for some people to be able to do church without being in the building, and challenges with that. So that's why TJ's here. He has all the answers. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also came up with all the questions. So that's how, every question ever. But if you're listening to this and you like what we do here, you should probably check out the Anazal Ministry Podcast Network website. The link is below. Check that out. See the shows that we like to like. And then we've just been updating our merch. It's ongoing, I believe. Josh just keeps having ideas. And like 2 out of 5 of them are pretty good, so they get to stay on the website. So head over there, Captivate, check out our merch if you want to support us, visually, publicly.
Yeah. Also, ironic that you say 2 out of 5. So there was 5 new designs that we put up. I think TJ liked 2 of them. I loved 2 of them, and they keep being taken off. So hopefully by the time you hear this, I can convince our website people to stop taking these listings off for no reason. But we'll see. You know how that goes. In the meantime, though, one extremely important thing we like to do here, because it's impossible to be in division when you have the kind of silliness that I like to have. It's what ensures unity. Yeah, it's silliness. Today, we're going to start with another silly question. I think it's an easier one, maybe. If you were a pirate captain, what pet would you most want? I'm going to let TJ go first because I think you'll have an interesting answer. Why?
What do you mean?
Just because sharks are
awesome.
cool? I mean, it's not going to obey you necessarily. You're just going to have a shark.
You have a weird relationship
How often
with your
do pets obey you?
Yeah.
Pets don't obey people like that, for the most part. You're like a highly trained shark is your pet.
Yeah, he's my shark.
All right. I'm going much less cool. I'm going to go with iguanas. As a pirate, I'm probably spending most of my time in the Caribbean. It'll be more humid, whatever weather. Easy climate control. Have a fun little tank. I could take it out when I want. And everybody has like a monkey or a parrot. It's people come into my captain's office and it's like, you just have iguanas. I'm like,
That would be cool.
Of course I do.
That would be cool.
Yeah. All right, Pastor Matt, what pet do you want as a pirate captain?
So I am going to give the least creative answer, but it's really just because I stinking love dogs. So I'm going to keep my dog. That's all there is to it. I mean,
that's a good answer.
Plus, I'm allergic to like half of everything else, so that doesn't help. I'm going to keep my dog with me.
Yeah.
I mean, dogs are useful, actually.
Yeah.
I get
also, a ship dog would be pretty sick.
It would be fun. And it would just jump in the water when you're, ported just cuz. That'd be great. Yeah. Strong answer. All right, Joe. Where are we at? What pet are you having as a captain pirate?
I'm going with the seal, 100%. Because you figure with pirates, half of it is making a name for yourself. People are going to remember a pirate with a seal as a pet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's 100% accurate. I like these aquatic pet ideas. I don't know why I didn't think of that. All right, Professor Moreland, where are you going?
A cat. Very useful on ships, making sure you don't have rats. And they like fish. And there's plenty of fish in the sea.
That's fair. They would still be cats, though. That's the only catch.
No, but cat is a good answer. I did think about that. And then I was like, well, I'm on a boat. I might as well get a shark.
It's true. Also, we do have like 3 cats, and I really like one of them. So, it's fair. Yeah. All right. So after our last roundtable, I mentioned this, or kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. Joe mentioned revisiting a comment that I made kind of offhanded about like how the sacraments requires presence. So, Joe, just because I want to make sure we're getting the idea right that we're talking about, would you mind unpacking why you feel it's important that we dig a little bit deeper into this?
Yeah. So, I watching the tone of the conversation last time, I very nearly commented, but as I wanted to break the meta and not completely and totally derail the conversation that time. So the pushback, and not really pushback, but an invitation to think deeply about the concept of presence sits at the level of, when we say that we need to be present, what exactly do we mean by that? And what exactly are we implying when we say that there needs to be a physical embodiment of the gathering of the saints in order for it to qualify, in order for it to be impactful or even be correct, depending on what level of adherence you're looking at, what level of severity language you're going to use, or different things like that. All with the idea that we're talking about something that has 52 different flavors to it. And by that, I mean there are countless different denominations. There are countless different practices. There are countless different opinions and perspectives on this matter. And I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, trying to step forward and say, "Thus saith the Lord, this is the way." But I push back at the level of having cut my teeth in the world of digital ministry. I've seen and experienced some things that have caused me to revisit this idea of the sacraments, with the exception of one. And so if you're looking at all of the classical sacraments, some would include baptism. I've never experienced baptism from afar, so it's very hard for me to wrap my mind around that one. Like I would love to engage in a conversation with somebody who has legitimately experienced that from afar, because I would be fascinated to have that conversation. Can't promise I would change my mind, but that's where I'm like, I feel like we're pushing the idea now at that point. But if I may, just to set the table from the perspective that I'm coming from, there's three different levels of digital ministry. There's the level that I would go as far as to say maybe 90+% of churches sit at, and that's goods and services. You throw up a live stream, you go live on Facebook, you have an alternative for people who can't make it into the church, but the idea is get to the church. That sort of thing. There's no real engagement. There's no real community online. It's just a matter of an alternative way of looking at the service. No shade, just an alternative means. That's goods and services. Then you have the evangelism model. A lot of megachurches sit at this level, where you are all of the pomp, all of the circumstance, all of the polish. And it's the idea is you are trying to draw people in and using it as an evangelical tool. That's the second level of it. And then there's actual digital church. Then there's actual online church, where there are outlets and forums to have community and engagement with other people. That's what I'm talking about pretty exclusively when I'm talking about the things that I'm talking about regarding a remote sacrament. We can get into specific examples. I want to honor the time and not sit here and go on a 10-minute diatribe, but it's the idea being that if there's actual community, if there's actual engagement with the saints, if it's actually like packaged in a way just different from flesh and blood, being in person, at what point are we more prioritizing the physical space than we are the spiritual implication of the practice itself?
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I do want to get into what you mentioned early on, what we mean by presence. I'm going to do a little backtracking here, though. So before doing this episode, I reached out to Father Jonathan, friend of the show, Orthodox priest, as well as a few different of our former, guests of the show who are Catholics or Orthodox, those higher liturgical who have more of a history with some of this, because I think it's important to have that perspective. We're going to talk about sacraments or presence. Former guest, it's been a while since we had him, and he almost made it today, but some things came up. Joe Mancuso. He is a Catholic believer, runs a couple podcasts and different digital ministry stuff, whatever. He also mentioned that the theology of presence is really important to him. So I think that's kind of what he would have brought to this table. So this idea of presence, and I think that's the center of why we do sacraments, and it's the center of what this conversation is going to be about, and what we mean by digital church as opposed to, that evangelical model, or the, just kind of putting stuff out there like what Joe was talking about. But the church has had a history, before digital means, where there were still times where people couldn't make it to the physical building. We have this theology of sacrament, particularly the Catholic Church has a theology even that as the sacraments are blessed and as you take them, that they truly kind of transfigure. I don't have my mind. I understand some basics of that idea, but I don't want to misrepresent it. But if we're talking about the blessing of the elements having to be done by the priest, if we're talking about baptism, there are a lot of things that is difficult to wrap our mind around when we talk about like doing the sacraments remotely. So I do want to give Professor Moreland a second to kind of maybe introduce yourself a little bit more and unpack from a Catholic perspective. Where would you even want to start when we talk about what does it mean to be present, and how could remote stuff like this even be possible if it is?
Absolutely. So I am an alumni of UNCW's bachelor program, UNCW's master program in history, and I did some doctoral work out in the Graduate Theological Union at UC Berkeley. I currently serve as an academic advisor at UNCW. I do teach on the side in the Department of Philosophy and Religion. We know each other through our dear friend Sister Rose, and she got me hooked up to this podcast. It's been a really great experience. So sacraments have to have form and they have to have matter. So because of that, sacraments cannot be done remotely. So if you want the long and short answer, what does the Catholic Church think about remote sacraments? The answer is a big no. And I do wish Father Jonathan had been here today, and I don't want to put words in his mouth. I think that one slight difference between the Catholic and the Orthodox perspective is that the Orthodox, I believe, from what I know from one of my friends who's an Orthodox priest, can do confession over the telephone or Zoom. But I would want to hear that straight from them. But I know that in Catholicism, no sacraments can be done remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the closest I think the Catholic Church has ever been was COVID baptisms with like the holy water gun. That's about as remote as it gets.
I didn't hear about the holy water gun. That's funny. But so Professor Moreland, I'm sure since the Catholic Church has been around for a long time that there's answers to this. What happens when people can't physically get to the church building? How do they participate in the sacrament still?
So for communion, you can do spiritual communion. This has happened a lot during times of illness, plague, and it was used a lot during the Nazi and communist persecutions. So you pray along with the Mass and you make an act of spiritual communion. It is not a substitute for going to communion. And of course, there is this idea that, God is merciful and just and understanding. So obviously, your expectations of when you're next going to get communion are a little different from being struck down with a cold in bed and being imprisoned in a Soviet gulag. One is like, okay, let's say within another week or so you can go get communion. But for someone like, let's say, Walter Cizek, who was put in the gulag, it might be 3 years. I don't think I'm out of bounds in saying that there would be grace there and there would be understanding if, Father Walter Cizek couldn't have gotten communion a week after making a spiritual communion because of the circumstances he was under.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So before we move on, Pastor Matt, did you have anything you want to add to what's been said so far?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, obviously, I'm coming from more of a Protestant conversation when it comes to communion, and there's going to be a lot of things that probably differentiate those two. But with that being said, I think in general, when it comes to Lord's Supper, to communion, when it comes to Protestant settings, there's so much conversation. I actually got to preach on this on Sunday. But so much conversation around even what is the practice of communion in the first place. When you look at historically church-wise, I think a lot of our churches, and I don't mean this, I'm just simply stating my fact, not so much an attack against any other thoughts or anything, but coming from a fairly normal church background, non-denominational background, communion is one of the things that I think is so deeply misunderstood in the first place in a lot of our churches. I think that my take on communion is probably different from a lot of us as we have this conversation. But I mean, I look at it as something that, as I preached on Sunday morning, when you look at the way that Paul describes communion, I don't necessarily think it's meant to be a traditional practice that we take part of exclusionarily within the walls of church. I mean, looking at the early church, They were meeting in houses. It was originally ordained for people to be doing in-house church settings, so it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense from that being my background to keep it within the four walls of the church as the only approved setting for it. So I kind of come from that background. I also come from the belief that like communion in general, and this will probably differ some, but communion in general isn't strictly something to be done once a month or whatever else. I read it in scripture as something that we do every time we eat and drink, the common elements that were common at that point in time. So I have a very different perspective on communion, but we can get into that a little bit later as we go on. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't want to hold us up, and we're going to get to some of my ideas a little bit later, probably in the roundup. But for me, it does depend on the sacrament, right? Like holy orders, I think I can be a little loose on personally. Marriage, I don't think marriage can be done remotely. I think both parties should probably be present. Baptism, I still, that water gun idea is interesting. I'm unsure. I don't see a way to do that remotely. It's kind of confusing. Communion, to me, the interesting thing about this, and I kind of wish he would have been here, but we had, why can't I remember his name? The Anglican chaplain, TJ, do you remember? Why am I struggling?
I barely remember my name sometimes.
Man, I'm going to feel terrible later because like this guy's cool. Anyway, we had an Anglican chaplain on the show once. He did talk about when he's, as a chaplain, taking the elements from the church to people who need it in the hospital in different areas like that. And the reason that piques my interest when we're talking about like the theology of presence, we're going to dig into deeper a little bit later, is I think something about communion, it is important that we are eating from the same loaf. We're drinking from the same cup, maybe not literally the same cup each time, but I like this idea of if people do have to do it remotely, we're taking the same bread that we're taking in our church to them somehow, or the same wine. I think there is something there, and maybe that's just me being a little too overly spiritualizing the physical. I don't know, but I still think there's something about the theology of presence to me that I haven't fully thought out here. I'm still wrestling with.
Yeah. I want to say his name was Steve.
Yeah, Steve Langclose. Thank you.
Do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Yes, Joe.
So when I was going through the master's program that I was a part of on spiritual formation, one of the things that was in the coursework was go to a worship service that you are not that you are not used to, that you are not accustomed to, that's outside of your tradition. And so being in an area that is very heavily Catholic, I decided to go to a mass, and I'd had a really great conversation with the priest afterwards. I was very honest with him that, like, I'm not a Catholic, but I am here, and explained to him why I'm here and all of that kind of stuff. And we had a great conversation, and that led me down the road of, since having done that, having a lot of appreciation for my Catholic brothers and sisters. And I live right down the road from a Catholic church, and I've got a great relationship with the priest of that church as well. And I have to say, out of respect for the tradition, I don't take communion in that setting, but there is a piece of it that sings to my soul when I see folks taking from the same cup and taking from the same bread. That's why I wanted to be very clear of saying that I do not believe like there are some bridges, like Pastor Matt said, there are some bridges that I don't think we're going to be able to cross, with some of us coming from the Protestant tradition, others coming from the Catholic tradition, and even between Pastor Matt and I, coming from two different aspects of the Protestant tradition, maybe would find things that we don't necessarily see eye to eye on. But there is something beautiful when you are among a physical body of believers taking in the elements I would say the same thing in a Protestant tradition, though I do think I have my opinions on the ritualized cup of juice and the little gimmick cracker and all that jazz. Whatever. But so I think that's a little like like I really wish that if we were going to do this in person, that we would just like do it. You know what I mean? Like actually do the tradition. But I do just want to, as the voice who brought this forward and brought the subject forward. Yes, I stand by what I say about digital ministry, and digital church, but it is in no way, shape, or form trying to devalue the practice in person, though I do think in person we lose a little bit of something when we say, okay, once a month, the first Sunday of every month, we're gonna do communion, and like by ritual that's exactly what we're gonna do the first Sunday of every month. Like I don't necessarily agree with that, but again, though, I don't think it's a matter of a clear cut yes or no perspective coming from that, like you said, there's it's a hard no from the Catholic tradition. So I'm not trying to put words there. I'm saying specifically from the Protestant tradition.
So before we get too deep into it, we did want to cover, like go for everybody and just briefly describe what the sacraments mean to you. How you distinguish the sacraments from the other ordinances, how you view the theology of presence with the sacraments, and how the elements of each sacrament are important to you, if they are. We're going to start with Professor Moreland because he's Catholic.
Yeah.
So sacraments, as I mentioned before, have to have physical presence. They have to have form and matter. They're outward. They're a visible sign. And the sign must have been given or instituted by our Lord. And the sacrament must give grace. I do put a major emphasis on, in my personal perspectives, which I think are in line with the church's, is that form and matter is super important. The way that you do things with the proper elements is incredibly important. So I think that I am not comfortable when people try to play fast and loose with sacraments, like substituting like Creator, Redeemer, and Liberator for like the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or messing with wine in place of, putting grape juice or something else in place of wine, or, messing around with the formula of the Eucharistic, the host, the bread. So, yeah.
Yeah, which is fair because, transubstantiation is kind of a big deal. So, cool. Matt, do you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. Again, with respect to the fact that we're different, I would just say we don't technically speaking celebrate any sacrament in the sense that the word sacrament means imparting grace. There's no aspect in which, outside of just salvation being something through just the free gift of grace, that's kind of the side we lay on. Ordinances, on the other hand, as practices of the church, things that we actually do. We do celebrate communion, obviously marriage, obviously baptism, all of those things as well. Just with the distinction that baptism is not a saving ordinance. It's not technically a sacrament in the sense that it imparts grace. Communion in the same setting, we do not believe that it imparts grace or anything along those. And I will say just very quickly, I worked in Utah for 5 years, and so I'm very, very, very deeply well acquainted, fortunately or unfortunately, with LDS theology. I have a lot of that in the background as well, and that really did kind of experiencing an LDS version growing up in Maryland around Catholic Church. I had some idea, but being out there kind of helped form my belief and in some ways our church's belief around the differentiation between sacrament and ordinance, just in the way that I would describe it.
Mm-hmm. All right, Joe.
I would copy and paste, the major themes of what Matt said. As far as grace goes specifically, but with the added idea that these ordinances that we are given, whether they are in person or they are remote, need to be taken with the utmost importance. That's why I say what I say about having a lot of respect for the way that my Catholic brothers and sisters or Orthodox brothers and sisters handle communion, because there is a reverence to it. The bells, the whistles, the I's, the T's, the details, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, no, I can't say as though we're on the same page as far as that goes. But none of that takes away from the level of significance that is given to the practice. And I think sometimes, coming from the Protestant tradition, and I would say this pretty universally, because for those of you that don't know that this is your first time hearing me on the whole church, I fancy the title interdenominational pastor. Because I've had a lot of experience in a lot of different situations in a lot of different contexts. So I'm kind of a mutt when it comes to when it comes to the pastorate. And I would say in a lot of situations, in a lot of contexts, the Protestant tradition does kind of water down the significance of the practice of communion. And really, I would go out from there. I wouldn't yes, I understand a lot of the conversation that we're having. We keep coming back to the topic of communion, because generally that's probably where we're going to see a lot of the most notable differences or opinions, or it's the most common, or whatever the case may be. But I could very easily kind of radiate outward from the point of communion and say some of the same things about some of the other traditions that we have.
Right. So, Josh, sacramentally, where do you lie?
Yeah. I think it's all important. So there's that fun meme of like Lutherans and Anglicans where like there's two guys and they ask, are you Protestant or Catholic? And one of them says Protestant and the other one says Catholic. Yeah. I found myself comfortably there before I realized I wanted to become Lutheran. I just... for me, it's more doing this podcast and meeting people, realizing, man, I am not one of the smarter people in the church. I might be average, maybe. And it just kind of makes me realize throughout the history, and that's like what C.S. Lewis talks about when he talks about like this, our modern superiority complex of like, oh, we're smarter now than they used to be. And I'm like, I don't believe that. I don't believe I'm smarter than Augustine or Jerome. Probably smarter than Thomas Aquinas. He was wrong. Yeah, but that's because we have issues with him specifically. It's fine. But that's why, like, to me, even though I don't find church tradition authoritative, I feel foolish to contradict it. I think for the most part, there have been much smarter people than me that kept falling in line with that. People who are much closer to God who kept falling in line, and that's why the Catholic Church is what the Catholic Church is. And that's where I don't take a lot of this stuff lightly. I do think with the sacraments, there is some general, I don't think it is salvific necessarily, but I think that it is a way of genuinely participating in grace, receiving grace. Ironically, I get some of this from the Pentecostal church growing up. I saw anointing of sick and people healed, and it is hard for me to see someone who had cancer be healed and say there wasn't some kind of participation of grace there. There was, you know what I mean? It's hard for me to deny that. And I've seen those prayers happen over the phone. And that's where some of this gets kind of weird for me. So yeah, for me, sacraments are something where you are receiving of grace. You are partaking of grace. So I will go with anointing of the sick. Yeah. The Eucharist, I am going to agree with the church there. That's why I think it's important that we try to make it the same bread and same wine in some way if we can, that we're all communion is, we are in communion with one another and with God. So it needs to be the same elements blessed. I think it's important for the wine to be bitter. It's supposed to represent blood. I hate when I go to a church and you have sweet wine. What are you doing? But I don't think any of the stuff is salvific. For me, I wouldn't say matrimony. I didn't feel like I received some kind of grace. It was the greatest moment of my life. I understand why it's symbolic of God. I would think matrimony more of an ordinance than a sacrament, probably. I got to nitpick all the way through, but I definitely think baptism, confirmation, anointing of the sick. Well, maybe not confirmation. Baptism, Eucharist, anointing of the sick. I'm iffy on confirmation. Confession, I definitely, the Bible straight up tells us to confess our sins one to another. I'm there with that. Yeah. TJ, what about you?
Yeah, so like the last 40 seconds of what you said is pretty much how I live, because I am still Pentecostal. But like you said, growing up, to me, the sacraments are communion, baptism, foot washing, because I'm Pentecostal, but it is hard for me to look at the tradition of the Catholic Church knowingly and say like, there's nothing there. Obviously, there's something there. Just because my church does not put that much weight in tradition does not mean that I don't fully respect the Catholic tradition of communion. For us, it's different. We'll do the little cups and the cardboard wafer. I kind of like the cardboard wafer, but only when we have to. Like we have also done the wine and the bread. Like it's just kind of whatever we can afford to do.
Yeah. Like for me, since I don't think it's salvific, I don't have an issue when people do it differently necessarily, but I will say the time that I felt like I've received the most grace during communion, going to Pastor Will's church, Lutheran church, right there in Chapel Hill, these sweet old ladies make the bread, and we're all literally sharing the same loaf that someone in the church made, and like something about that, I don't know if I felt closer to God and to one another in the church than in that moment being able to take communion there. That's just me.
But I agree with that. But for me, that's like very low sacramental, get baptized, take communion. Communion for us is pretty rare. It's nowhere near the same level as any of the even medium liturgical churches. So, and marriage to me, it just never like occurred to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's fair. Definitely can't. That one, I will hold hard the whole episode. Cannot be done remote.
That's true.
Or should not be done remote. Maybe it can, but it shouldn't.
Yeah, that's like it's like the movie Flubber. They get married remote. It's a sham marriage.
I forgot about that. So true. We're calling that specific film out Disney. Just real quick, just want to hear everybody's just like no context. What is the weirdest version of this that we've encountered? So whether if you've watched the Golden Gemstones, wave pool baptisms, potato chips for communion. We already mentioned the water gun. For baptism. What's everyone's weirdest encounter with this? And you can give it a 0 to 10 rating if you want, just for kicks and giggles. Matt, you want to go first for that one?
Yeah, I got you. I just a couple weeks ago witnessed a virtual baptism I still don't know how I feel about it, but I saw it. It was on goodness, what's the game? You get dropped out of an airplane helicopter situation. Video game.
Just PJ. One of them?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's absolutely true. The big one. Fortnite or
that
Warzone? Was it.
Yeah.
Fortnite baptism. Weirdest thing I've seen. So I put that at like a 9 or a 10. Not quite sure. And then I did witness Twinkies and Mountain Dew for communion one time. And that's a whole nother story. And I'll give that one like a 9 as well. I'm sorry, Christopher. I know. I'm sorry. All right, we'll move on.
Yeah. Matt values creativity. Joe, just no context.
I'll be the heat-seeking missile here, and say that I facilitated communion that involved Gatorade and Doritos. So there's that again. Sorry.
I'll go next. I feel like we need to let Christopher get as much build up as he can with this, because we know he's going to give something a 0 out of 10. We just don't know what. I think the weirdest ones I heard of. This is challenging. I had a really good one. Oh, I'm going to go with the baptism one too. From Animal Crossing. No, not baptism. It was Eucharist. They did a Eucharist setting in an Animal Crossing place during COVID. I kind of want to give it a 6 out of 10 because, I really appreciate people's desire to participate in the sacraments and missing one another. But that's not communion. But I appreciate the desire. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was actually something on the show we've been through. A few weeks ago, we found out about they do Latin Mass on VR chat, and they're furries. They do their furry avatar Latin Mass. And I just
assuming Eucharist.
Yeah, I just assume the
Mass,
Eucharist.
Yeah.
They did furry Mass Eucharist.
Yeah. Yeah. For context, because this one is important with a little bit of context. This was something we heard of due to some autism research. So I don't want to I don't want to bash it or love it or anything that, because, that is a hand grenade I don't want to fall on. Chris, give us, what is getting your 0 out of 10? Is it everything we just said?
Pretty much. But I'll give you my own 2 personal experiences. One I really just didn't mind as much because it's Episcopalian. I mean, they do their thing, we do our thing. It's not something we would do, but there's an Episcopalian summer camp that one of my friends, who's an ordained minister, did, and they did a pool Eucharist, meaning that they were doing the Eucharist in the swimming pool. Okay. At least, form and matter was there.
I guess.
Maybe people were not dressed to the nines or anything. But at least if I remember correctly, the bread and wine was still on the side of the pool and not kind of floaty or something, because that would.
Just when it floats by, just grab some.
Not so sure how I feel about that. I would definitely say that something that did extremely upset me, and I was very unhappy about, and a lot of other people were unhappy about, was there was a Jesuit community that tried to be cute and tried to mess with the Eucharist by making it at home and adding not just flour and water, but adding honey and lemon zest to it. And from our theology and from canon law, that means that Eucharist was not valid. So everyone, whether they wanted, and not everyone knew that the Eucharist had been tampered with, but I see that is incredibly grave, because people who had no idea thought that they were receiving the sacrament and they weren't. So I think that woe to the person that did that and did it. And the other thing is the person did it knowingly and was confronted about it and continued to do that until the bishop got involved.
That's crazy. That just kept going.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely different when it's against your own traditions, theology, and people don't know what's happening. I feel like that's definitely, to me, it's got to be worse than knowingly doing any of the other things.
I do have to say, I did a wedding in a pool one time, and I don't know that I count that in the sacramental conversation, but I did in the shallow end of a pool. Their backyard in St. George, Utah, they didn't have a yard. It was just a pool. And so they said, hey, we're going to stand right there. And I said, cool, I guess I need swim trunks.
Yeah.
By the end of this, Chris is going to block another hour of his week out to pray for our salvation.
That would be nice. That would be very nice. But we have finally made it to what we like to call the roundtable roundup. And I think you've all done this before. I'm still going to go over it for clarity's sake, but we have 4 questions for everybody to choose from today. You have to choose one question to answer. No one's allowed to respond or follow up on your statement until after the roundup is complete. So hold it in. Just wait. There will be time.
You do have to repeat the question you're answering for those listening who forgot what you're answering.
Yes, you do have
and don't have the outline in front of them.
Repeat the question. And we might all pick the same question to answer. That's fine. If everyone just really wants to answer A, we'll answer a bunch of times. We're okay with that. So I'm going to read them off, and then we're going to start. Our A question is, how might reflecting on the history of the role of the acolyte challenge or inform our thinking about how churches practicing sacraments remotely today? Our B question is, does it matter what elements we use in Eucharist, and do they need to be blessed by a priest in person before partaking? C is, if sacraments inherently involve embodied participation with God and each other, can taking them remotely fully achieve their intended spiritual purpose? And D is, how might remote sacraments reshape our theology of presence and our connection to Christ's incarnation? So, I'm not sure who the fastest thinker is, but I do have to choose somebody to go first. And I think I'm going to go with Joe. Joe, what question are you going to answer for us today?
I'm going to go with C. If sacraments are inherently if they inherently involved embodied participation with God and each other, can taking them remotely fully achieve their intended spiritual purpose? I would say yes, they can. I coming from the tradition of and I guess the school of thought of the mystics and of the now and not yet kingdom, and like that whole school of thought. One of the things that I try very hard to help people to understand is God in the everything. That the idea that the God that we serve and love and are in relationship with transcends the limitations that we put on various religious aspects. And when there is a community, and I would define that like maybe more broadly than even some of my Protestant brothers and sisters, that vehicle for the partaking of the sacraments is that is what we are seeing played out in the scriptures. That this is something that can be taken and in different settings, in different situations, be applied outside of one large physical group setting. And so when we are talking about the spiritual implications of it, then I would say that is fulfilled by engaging in this ancient practice that symbolizes the act of Jesus.
All right, cool. That was Joe's shortest answer to a question ever. We kept track. But we're going to go with Matt next. Matt, do you know which question you're going to answer first today?
Yeah. I've got B. Does it matter what the elements are made of? I know there was a slightly different wording on that, but that's what I'm taking on.
Yeah. So does it matter what elements we use in Eucharist, and do they need to be blessed by a priest in person before partaking?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Obviously depends on your church background, because I'm sure many others would have different opinions, but and I respect that. But my perspective, no, does not matter what the elements are, so much so is my honest perspective, based in the fact that I look at, again, the scripture being my guiding point for it. Scripturally speaking, you're looking at a meal where they were eating bread and drinking wine, the two most common things to be eaten and drank at that point in time. That's just as simple as it was. I don't see those two elements as particularly, I think they're great. I think there's beautiful tradition in it, but particularly exclusionary to others, being that the point trying to get across from Jesus, I believe pretty firmly, was as you are eating your ordinary everyday food, please remember that this is a thing that has been given for you, that my grace is sufficient for all of these things. So to me, no. And then when it comes to does it need to be blessed, I, not in the traditional sense of praying over for it to be blessed, no, I do not see it that way. However, within the sense of you're in church taking communion, I pray over the communion, pray for the people as they're taking it. So I guess the dichotomy is a little different, but no, I don't see it as blessed in the same way. I've taken Mass before, and I know it's quite different. So
it is a bit different. So, Professor Moreland, which question would you like to answer for us today?
I'd like to answer B, but in a sort of way that piggybacks off what we heard previously. From the Catholic perspective, the elements must be there, the form and matter must be there, an approved ritual must be done, the approved sacrament must be done without any additions or subtractions, and it must be done by a priest. However, you can distribute communion as a layperson to those who are sick or who are homebound. You can also, and you can even do this for what they call viaticum, which is final communion. Sort of a parallel to this also, I do want to note that in our tradition, you can do, as a layperson, emergency baptisms. It's the only sacrament a layperson's allowed to do. So yeah.
Cool. All right. So I'll go with D, which is how might remote sacraments reshape our theology of presence and our connection to Christ's incarnation. For me, we do play fast and loose with the sacraments. That's just the kind of thing that we do at Pentecost. But the remoteness of it is not necessarily exclusionary to the grace of it for us. I do believe that if someone is ill or unable to travel, that taking the remote sacraments is perfectly reasonable as long as you are in community with the church when it happens. So we can make a great effort to make that happen. Again, except for baptism, that's kind of hard. You might just have to wait to get baptized if you are too ill to be baptized traditionally. But if we got to get it done, we'll get it done. I promise you that. And I'm not sure if that's a Pentecostal thing. That might just be a Southern thing. But we will make it happen somehow. I absolutely promise. I do not think the theology of the presence is particularly relevant for us, just because we do tend to believe that God is everywhere. In our actions, God is blessing our actions. We're taking the sacrament in His name. If there's at least 3 of us, that's the presence. So remote, not strictly, not necessarily, but I do think that connection, gathered in one place could be online. I'm not God. I don't know all the answers. I hope you would count it.
Yeah. I was going to answer A because nobody else did. And I was already leaning towards A anyway. How might reflecting on the history of the role of the acolyte challenge or inform our thinking about churches practicing sacraments remotely today? What I've read about the history of the acolyte, which I could be mistaken, they're like helpers. So they help prepare the sacraments with the deacons, especially originally. That was kind of the role. And part of that included making sure the wine was prepared, making sure the bread was prepared, making sure the candles were brought to the altar, and that these things also, for those who weren't able to physically go to the church buildings, were prepared. Like a section was portioned out for those who weren't able to make it. So I think leaning on tradition and history and seeing roles like this and how the church has constantly being creative and how do we get this to people, I think is important. Going back to stuff we talked about earlier, I think it's important that we do have online churches that aren't just like evangelical tools or just throwing up our sermons. And I think part of the role of the church is for the community. So I take issue with people being like, oh, I'm part of the Hillsong Church in Australia. I'm like, no, you're not, man. That is not your community. I want us to have Rock Hill have an active online church that I can be a participant in. And if we are able to make something like that happen, I can easily see where, I think the priest is still blessing the sacraments and people like acolytes or whatever are able to bring them to people. So we are participating in the same bread and the same wine remotely. It'll take work, but I think there are ways to do this if we're just a little bit more creative. And I think if we look at the tradition of the church, we've been pretty good at being creative in the past. I don't think it's time to stop now.
Yeah. And I don't want to put any ideas in any corporations' heads, but DoorDash and communion, maybe, No, I do think that's a bad idea. So, does anyone have anything to add?
Yes.
Follow-ups or remarks to anyone's roundup answer?
I want to add, when we talk about presence and all of this, just for context, I mentioned this in our last roundtable, but my grandfather, the last few years of his life, desperately wished he could get to church and he just couldn't leave his house. And the thing that wasn't important wasn't necessarily that he was able to take the Lord's Supper or that he was able to be baptized again. He was already baptized, right? The thing that was important was that the church was coming to him. And when we talk about remote church, if we're not including in the conversation going to people, I'm not sure that that's church. So I think that's something that we really need to sit in. It's like, are we trying at least to go to where people are? And I do, to me, that part of the theology of presence is important, not just in our sacraments, but in what we mean when we say church in the first place. And I know that's a big can of worms, and I'm sorry.
I'll go ahead and jump on that can of worms with smile
I know
on
somebody
my face and a song in my
would
heart.
take the bait.
Oh, come on! You knew when you were saying that you were baiting me. Come on. Okay, so this kind of falls in line with D, but I am going to color outside the lines. So sorry ahead of time. I want to be clear, as the guy who's been talking the most about remote church, digital church, the whole 9 yards. I like the analogy that you used, Josh, of I'm a part of Hillsong in Australia. Are you are you? Like, and I'm not trying, whatever. Like, it's an evangelism tool. And for anybody who has come to Christ by way of a church's evangelism tool like that, as long as it was the starting point, line 1, verse 1 of a much larger story, then yes and amen. Okay, great. But there is a monumental difference between experiencing an evangelical tool or experiencing and taking in a sermon and a worship set from X church wherever that has no, like, maybe they threw in the comments section, hey, glad you're with us today. That's not engagement. That's not community. That's somebody who knew that they needed to throw something in the comment section. And I care very deeply about this, because on the other side of that is the opportunity for remote community. And I defend this very hard because of the lives that I have seen changed through remote connectivity. People who really legitimately do not have a source of community around them, a church where they can call their home, a place to be able to come together with the saints in worship, but they have found honest to goodness community in the online space, and a place where they can fully embrace the worship of God among other believers. I cannot square every circle. I cannot cross every bridge. For every person who thinks differently about the collection of the saints, about what a worship service should look like, and all of those things, and I'm not here to necessarily change anybody's mind in regards to that. But if we take seriously the idea of remote sacraments, I think it opens the door to a larger conversation about reshaping how we view the transcendence of God, God in the everything, that we can, in fact, reach beyond the structure of that time and that place to the heart of the matter, not foregoing the whole thing, not throwing the entire book out, but kind of like what Pastor Matt said about looking at it from the point of view of these were the most reachable elements of that time, but also going a step further from what are we doing as far as going to people? Well, I think you can go to a person exactly where they're at, in front of this camera, in front of this microphone, and still be in community with that person. And I think when we widen our horizons a bit and take a look at that deeper context of what it means to be in the presence of God and what it means to be in community with others, then an entirely different chapter can be written, not just in what's available or what opportunities you have to be able to connect with other people, but also the depths of the reality of the presence and promise and faithfulness of God, to see past the limitations on our own situation and circumstance. And I'll use a particular example for this to drive it home, and then I'll get off my soapbox for a second, okay? Josh, of all people, TJ too, but Josh of all people will be able to say yes and amen to this. And I'll speak about myself very, very openly and be perfectly fine with it. I was a jerk when we first met. I was hard to be around. I had a lot of trauma regarding the church. I had a lot of trauma in regards to cooperating with the saints because of my own church hurt and experiences that I carried into it. And so I was very hard to cooperate with. If it weren't for digital community and digital church, I'm not sure that you get the same person who's sitting here now. Sure, I can still be full of vinegar. I can still be full of passion. I still get animated. I care deeply about the things that I care deeply about and all of those kinds of things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I can also look across the table at whoever is sitting across the table. And we could be so far off base that we're not even playing the same game. We're not even in the same state, and say, awesome, blessings to you, because you are still connecting with God, just in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with most of everything that Joe said. I'm going to push back on something that he said, but he was quoting Matt. So I'm going to give Matt the chance to respond to that. Then I have a question for Chris, and then I'm going to text TJ that we're going to skip 10. Because I think we've already answered that on the outline, and people listening are like, huh, and it's fine. So one of the things that Joe said, so I agree with almost everything. I don't think Joe was that bad when we first met. But yeah, I've seen online ministry work on him. I've seen it work with me. TJ and I are part of Theology Beer Camp. And man, the amount of people who go to these events who like, man, they've just had so much hurt. They don't want to step foot in a church anymore, but they still want to be part of a faith community. Like, thank God for these online communities. Like I genuinely think there's a lot of good. Like I think there is grace in some of this. There we go. I'm just gonna drop that there. But both of you guys mentioned the Eucharist and talking about the elements that were there at the time. They were there because it was Passover. Like, this wasn't like, oh, this just because it's the most accessible stuff, we're going to use this. It was because it's Passover. It was an important religious elements that they are continuing on to a different sacrament, going from Judaism into Christianity. So I don't think it was bread and wine because this is the most available stuff at the time. I think it's because they were in a religious moment in a particular space and and this is why I think it's important that the wine is bitter. We are pulling from Passover, and to just change it into something completely different to me is not honoring of the origins, which, hey, sometimes we can't. I get it. But I don't think it's right to say that it's just the most available things. Although Thomas Aquinas seemed to have different opinions, but he also thought we should only be able to use wheat bread exclusively. And that's probably because he didn't realize that there's lots of places in the world that don't use wheat, and Thomas Aquinas is not my favorite. So, Matt, you want to respond to some of that since I'm pushing on your idea, and maybe you're like, man, this guy sucks.
No, you're all good, man. It's whole church. I'm good. No, I would say unequivocally, I do think there's drastic importance in the fact that it is happening during Passover. I don't think that's something we should miss. I think that is even down to, as Luke notes, which cup Jesus is using, I think is a drastically important fact when it comes to how we ought to view communion. I completely agree with that. Now, with that being said, there are multiple other items at the table during a Passover dinner that are far more exclusionary, far more difficult to get a hold of, that Jesus could have arguably picked up. He could have picked up the lamb. He could have gone for these more extravagant pieces of what was sitting at the table, but it is
horseradish. We're now including horseradish in all of our Eucharists.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I mean, historically, it's pretty inarguable that bread was about the most common thing that every culture has lived off of, from just about any anthropologist opinion I've ever talked with. And wine would have been a much safer thing to drink at the time than the water. So these are kind of two very common, though maybe not. I understand the traditional pushback to, like, am I saying that we should just take communion with McDonald's because it's the most common food laying around? Like, no, I get it. I do. And I want to say I deeply, deeply appreciate the beauty with which, and I think everybody's kind of talked about that, but the beauty with which a loaf of bread and a cup of wine carries. I think there's something different about that, because whether it's grace being imparted in a specific sense, if it's something like the Lutherans talk about something mystical happening, but I still don't quite understand the difference between Catholic and Lutheran communion. That's a different conversation. But like, as you see those pieces, like I get that, I do. And maybe that's part of it. I would lean towards saying, I think there is something inherently beautiful about walking in the footsteps of people, what they've been doing for thousands of years. So if bread and wine are available to you, sick. That sounds like the greatest thing. That's what we use for communion. I completely agree with that. But in circumstances where, I mean, we had a Sunday where out in Utah, somebody went to go pick up the bread that we typically got, and they accidentally bought garlic bread. Not like Texas toast garlic bread, but like garlic flavored bread. And it was off-putting. Like, I'll be completely honest about it. I took a bite and I was like, what the heck is this? This is different. But from my perspective, do I think God was any less honored by that? I do not. I don't think that's the case. I do think that Jesus was making a statement by using the most readily available element on the table during Passover. I think does still speak true to what we see today. I don't have an issue with that, but I understand the pushback. Appreciate it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the answer. I like that. I think I agree. For the record, I just felt like it's necessary to point out the Passover elements. No, so my thing for Chris, and then yes, DJ, I will text you about 10. But Professor Moreland, as the only one here who is of the Catholic tradition, you know, we've brought up a lot of stuff that I would just kind of like to hear your take on when it comes to like a lot of Protestant ideas being it doesn't really matter what the elements are if they're blessed from a priest. And of course, that's going to come from that disagreement about transfiguration, which we've mentioned, but I don't know if we've actually addressed. You know, Lutherans, I think Orthodox as well as Anglicans have this like real presence idea where it's not literally the body and blood of Christ, but it's like he's really there. We just don't know how, so we're going to leave it ambiguous. So we had that, and you know, I also mentioned stuff about praying for the sick over the phone or sending the elements to people who aren't able to attend. So I would just kind of like your response to just some of the stuff we haven't had the chance to hear from you on yet.
Reminds me of what Flannery O'Connor said. If it's symbol, to hell with them. So, I mean, if your Eucharistic, theology is that it's a memorial, okay, go ahead, use Twinkies and Coke. What's the problem? But for those that believe in the real presence, for those that believe in divine mystery, you're going to need the right elements, and they're going to need to be done by an ordained minister. So that's, my really concise take on it. But yeah, I think it is very important to know, for those that are new to this podcast, that there are differences in Eucharistic theology between various Protestant denominations. The Lutherans, the Anglicans, the Methodists, Episcopalians, Moravians, Mennonites, they're all going to have slightly different theologies. And I think it's important to know that because a lot of Protestants just seem to church shop, which is fine. Look, Catholics do it too. We just try to find the parish that has the best liturgy, I guess, and the best sermons. But, I think people should understand if they're a Protestant, what is it that their denomination teaches about the Eucharist? And not to be too emotional, but like, what are your feelings about that? Like, how does it resonate with you? Like, how does it resonate with your study of Scripture? Does it make sense? Maybe it's time to change denominations because of it's not in accord with what you thought.
Yeah. What about we've mostly talked about the Eucharist, a little bit about baptism. Are there any of the other sacraments you think that maybe we should talk a little bit more on with remoteism, or do you think that's just kind of we could shrug it off?
I think we can shrug it off at this point.
All right.
So, is there anything else that anyone thinks we need to address or talk about concerning sacraments or remote church participation?
I want to say yes and amen to what the professor said as far as, hey, you know what? Ask yourself, what do you believe and why do you believe it? Ask yourself, how does that make you feel? Ask yourself, whoa, okay, so they do it once, I'm very used to the whole idea of the first Sunday, and so I'm going to keep using that object lesson. But, it's a once a month thing. Okay. How do you feel about it being a once a month thing? Would you rather it be a once a week thing? Would you rather it be wine instead of grape juice? Would you rather it be a loaf of bread rather than the gimmick cracker? Interrogate how you feel and be willing to say, okay, you know what? For this season of my life, however long that is, it could be for the rest of your life, you are making the conscious choice to partner with a different denomination because that is more in line with where you are at. Now, I get it. I understand what I just said, and I understand that in some situations, in some circumstances, there are huge red flags with the idea of a temporary partnership with a denomination and all of those kinds of things. Again, I cannot square every single circle. But there's a mentality that goes along with an openness to being willing to explore other denominations and be willing to say, okay, there are differences between different Protestants. There are differences between different high church traditions. There are differences between Protestantism and Catholicism, or Protestantism and other forms of high church. And be willing to say, to poke your head out of the hole enough to say something more than I've always been this, my family's always been this is where I'm from, and thus this is what I am. I think there's a courage that goes along with being willing to explore these things and actually ask yourself, what do you believe, rather than just blindly accepting whatever tradition has been handed down to you without doing any introspective thought about it.
Yeah. Since there's no Methodist present, I'm going to go ahead and reference the Wesleyan quadrilateral here. I mentioned earlier why I think tradition's important, and that I'm not the smartest person in the church, and I never will be. And, I think the Bible's important for obvious reasons, I hope. Reasoning, I think most of us just agree. If you're going to listen to podcasts that talk about this kind of stuff, you're probably like, yeah, reasoning's important, right? I really feel like a lot of times experience gets downplayed. The reason I think anointing of the sick as a sacrament is because I've experienced it. I've watched people sit there and pray. I've had my own moment where I was faced with death and felt the Spirit of the Lord say, hey, do you want to go back? I've seen these things. So for me, that's why I call that an experience, a sacrament. The reason I'm open to baptism being done different ways, and this is going to probably make Professor Moreland cringe a little bit. I've been at a church camp where kids were jumping in the pool during baptism, and it was complete and utter chaos. And man, I felt the Spirit of God there. So even though part of me is like, that doesn't equate, my experience says I might not know the whole picture here. And that's where I'm open to different things. And because I've experienced Eucharist in person with the bread baked from people in the church and realized, man, I felt a lot more here than I did with the little wafer and stuff at the other church. That doesn't mean my experience is the same as everybody else's, but I don't think we should ignore experience as much as we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for the record, those kids were jumping in that pool because they felt the Spirit of God moving.
And they wanted to go get baptized, and they were rushing to the baptism. Yeah.
Just so we're clear.
Yeah. Yeah. But anybody else, anything to add or respond to that? Or does Professor Moreland just want to verbally condemn us all real quick?
That's not what I'm here to do.
Okay, good.
I'm here to listen and learn and share, and be in communion with y'all.
Yeah. Well, and it's been really helpful to hear the Catholic perspective on this. So we kind of are more aware. I also feel like I would have felt a lot more alone without somebody else who's a little bit stronger on the theology of presence and the Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, then we do always like to end our show with practical action, where we just ask people something tangible that our listeners could do that would help better engender unity in the church. We're going to be a little bit specific here. Can we come up with something practical people can do to address some of the divisions in how we do sacraments? Today, I feel like we were all kind of able to play it off and kind of in jest talk about the differences. But like for some people, they get really mad when they hear that someone did communion with Twinkie and a Mountain Dew. And some people get really mad when they hear you think salvation can be through sacrament and not through just the simple prayer, or, like the idea that I talked about of like grace being really present. Some people are like, oh man, you're over spiritualizing, and get really angry at me for some of this. How do we, how do we have unity? How do people do what we're doing today, where we're able to kind of play some of this off in jest, even though we do have some pretty starch differences? Professor Moreland, would you kick us off here? You've been the one who's put up with the most nonsense, I think.
Whether it's spirituality or academia, having a sense of benevolence and inquisitiveness and curiosity is really important. A rush to judgment or assuming worst intent is just not going to get you anywhere. So I also think that it's, as far as possible, you should be as authentic to your tradition as possible. So if that's what your tradition's doing, go in line with it.
That's hard for me because I disagree with some of my tradition on some things. That sweet wine thing, it just really kills me. Not everybody does it, but man, I don't love it. But, Joe, how do you answer this? How do we do what we're doing today? For those listening who are like, man, you're just talking to these people and they're talking about the real presence of God, and Eucharist, and you're like, they're crazy people, but you don't want to say that. So like how do they do what you're doing?
Don't drop the necessity to convert. Drop the necessity to change minds. Be willing to stop and authentically listen to what the other person has to say, because if nothing else, you may learn something. Like I learned certain things from Professor Moreland today that I just simply did not know about the Catholic tradition. And so if we can stop feeling like we need to defend ourselves or defend our tradition and just simply live in the context of the tradition that you practice and that you support and do so openly, then I think the air changes. If the different people involved in the conversation are willing to do that, and you can at least have open air to be able to say, oh, okay, from my perspective and from my point of view, this is this and this is that, without saying, oh, because I think this way, you're wrong.
Yeah. Matt, same question, just something practical that helps people do what we were able to do today.
Yeah, I think kind of both of you guys said it, but just being curious in general, I think is really, truly one of the best things you can do in all aspects of life. Like, ask questions, listen with respect, be curious, because I think I got to meet with Mark Matlock from Barna a couple weeks back, and he's just written a book on curiosity. And one of the things that stood out to me was that in Barna's research, Christians are the least curious people in the U.S. We are the least open to listening, the least open to change.
That's sad.
Which doesn't surprise me, because I've been around Christians my whole life, so I get it. but that's bad. We need to change that. We need to be curious. We need to have open and honest communication, I think is huge.
Yeah.
All right. So what changes if everyone takes all three of those suggestions and does them? Who knows what happens? Does anyone see that?
Well, also, again, I'm going to throw it to Professor Moreland again, because he's the one that we say professor for. How do people do that? Because everything we said here is like, be curious, listen, but like, I feel like it's hard for people to just go out and be curious, go out and listen. Like, how do we develop that?
Honestly, you want to develop it? Sometimes you develop it by making mistakes and learning the hard way.
I was hoping you were going to say jump on the whole church podcast.
Yeah. So sometimes a classroom is where you have maybe you make the mistake, maybe someone else makes the mistake, and you see the ramifications of that, and you learn really quickly, yeah, that's not how we're going to conduct the class or have a conversation. And it sticks with you.
Mm-hmm. I kind of thought he was going to say, go to a mass.
Well, that too.
Yeah. Matt, how would you answer that before we get to TJ's question and he strangles me for making the podcast too long? How do people develop curiosity and good listening?
I think the first step is you go buy a whole church t-shirt. That's what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just joking. I genuinely think an aspect of it could in fact be go to a mass. Like I know that's a really strange piece for especially an Anabaptist pastor to state, but the truth of the matter is, like, my job is not trying to convince you against your will what I believe is true. Like, I really do firmly believe what I believe, and I do believe that if it's true, that the beauty and the truth of that will shine through. And I don't mean that as a slight against mass, but like, go check out other places. Like, that's not a bad thing. Go experience that. Be respectful, of course. I took communion when I went to mass because I was like 13 and I didn't know I wasn't supposed to. But at this point in life, I wouldn't. Like, you go be respectful and listen, ask the questions. I really do think taking that step to get out there is a huge thing that could benefit people.
Yeah. I'm going to add on too, and kind of do self-promoting, but only sort of. I actually do think podcasts are good ways of developing listening. You can't argue with your podcast, and if you're really curious, you hear something you never heard before, I think it's right. Like, I started following it's a Greek Orthodox podcast of these two priests, and it's usually 2 hours episodes, so it's like once a month, and I always learn something that I'm like, I would have never known any of this. So, maybe if you're Pentecostal, follow a Catholic podcast. If you're a Catholic and you heard some weird stuff out of like Joe and Matt, go find a Mennonite Brethren's podcast. Like, I'm sure it exists, and I think just finding ways to listen to one another, read a book, I think it's helpful. Joe, what happens when we do this?
I think we are able to better showcase the power and presence of God. I think we are able to better showcase the heart and character of God and what is capable when we drop the idea that we are not on the same team, even if we don't believe all of the same things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good stuff. I knew it would be worth it.
So, before we wrap up, we like to do what we call our God moment, which is where we share a moment where we saw God recently, whether that be a blessing or a challenge or a moment of worship or a curse, whatever it may be, whoever it could be. I always make Josh go first to give the rest of us as much time to think as possible. So, Josh, do you have a God moment for us?
Yeah. I trying to think which one to do. I know which one. I was at work almost 2 hours late the other day. There's just a lot of stuff that I needed fixed around the store that I've been. I've been doing I've actually been doing the figure eights. I went and bought a notebook that I just wrote figure eight on the top, and every morning and evening I do it.
Nice.
And I'm like, man, we got to fix all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so it was almost 2 hours over. And one of the other guys who was there, I've developed a friendship with. He's cool. He's a Christian guy. If he's listening, shout out Tyler. But he literally he was doing something. He was asking me how we should clean something that was in the lobby or something. I was like, dude, weren't you supposed to leave 2 hours ago? And he's like, well, I got to get this stuff done. I need to make it look good. And I was like, no, you don't. You can go. It's okay. And he just stared at me for a while. And I was like, that's right. I also have a life and shouldn't be here forever. And reminded me that work's not always the most important thing. And he didn't even say a word to do it. So, yeah, that'll be mine.
Mm-hmm. I'll go next. And this time I'm going to cheat because I never get to cheat. Yeah. So I have two. The first one, I think the most relevant one, is this past Sunday, I went to an apostolic church.
That's still cool. Yeah.
So that was, for me, not that shocking. Like I'm Pentecostal. Like it's not that different. But it was still a great opportunity. It was fun to talk to the pastors and, like meet these people who are in a similar, distinct tradition and see how they wear that. So that was really fun and eye-opening just to experience. And I wish I could get other people to go to an apostolic church, because it's possible to go to a Pentecostal service and like nothing be too crazy. Not an apostolic church. It's going to get loud,
I'll do it.
They go the full way every time. See, that's not surprising for you either. I need Christopher Moreland to go to an apostolic service and see how he thinks and feels
film
about
it for the whole church YouTube page.
That would be very, very interesting.
Yeah, but that was awesome. I was super glad to be able to do that. Also, my car broke down recently. AC compressor went out, serpentine belt, runs the water pump, couldn't drive it, whatever. I still have to work, and that's a really expensive fix for my car because my car is stupid. So got my dad to work on it, right? While I'm working and borrowing his car. And I felt really bad about it because, I hate ask my dad to do stuff. Super lucky that I can still do that, but still feel bad about doing it because, my dad is 60. Like my dad's an old man. But what made me feel a lot better about it is that when I went to, help him on like the final day, like it was almost done, I went to go get it and help him finish it. I found out that he also had to get help from his dad, my grandpa.
Nice.
Yeah. Awesome.
Love that. Yeah.
Super relieved. That's God. Because, 3 generations of people working on the same stupid car to get it fixed is something special. Yeah. And also, I'm extremely blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah. Now, my second God moment.
No.
Yeah. TJ has to have his car break down once a year. And I'm just thankful that this year it won't be for Theology Beer Camp. It happened early, so he'll be able to go.
Yeah. Twice this year. So
that's cheating.
Joe, do you have a God moment for us?
Yeah, I just got my car back today and it was cheaper than I thought it was going to be. So it was a easier fix than it looked like it was going to be. So
Man, if I knew there was a
Praise
theme,
God.
my wife's car's been having problems. I could have.
You need 3?
No, it's okay.
Oh, okay.
I'll be the odd one out.
All right. So, Matt, do you have a God moment for us this week?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've got a flat tire on my truck, but I'm not going to talk about that. I do though. But no, for me, genuinely, my daughter's got a lot of medical issues. My middle child, and she's always kind of somewhat fragile, and she ended up with a very strange autoimmune disease that just kind of started over the weekend, like head to toe covered in hives and just absolutely miserable. It is terrible, but I would say in a retrospective sense, as she's starting to get better today, there really is always that element when like my kids are sick and you would just give anything to try to help, give anything to be in their place and not have them have to take that on. That it really does genuinely just always remind me of like God's love for us, the ability that he has. I think it's easy to sometimes not think about that as I'm going throughout my day-to-day stuff, and then think about, man, like I would give anything for my daughter to feel better in this moment. And God literally did give everything for us. And for me, I think in a father perspective, I appreciate that side of things. So that's mine for this week.
Amazing. So, Professor Moreland, do you have a God moment for us?
Absolutely. I just finished teaching a class with Dr. Diana Pasolka on Armageddon, Apocalypse, and Antichrist. We had like 120 students. We had the best time. And we're going to start prepping for our next round where we will be focusing on the AI apocalypse. So we started broad. Now we're going to go deep. But I've been very touched by the experience and by the wonderful students we've had and the energy that's there for continuing adult education. It was far beyond what my cynical little heart expected. So it's moved me and given me some hope.
Yeah, that's great. I do believe the link for those classes is in the whole church Facebook group page.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and I will follow up with you when you can sign up for the next class.
Awesome.
Cool. So, if you liked this episode, or if you really hated this episode, please consider sharing with a friend or your enemies. Share with your cousins. Legally obligated to,
especially your cousins.
Yeah, they're obligated to check out whatever you send them. Everyone knows that.
Especially the closer it gets to Thanksgiving, they dread you asking, "Oh, what'd you think of that podcast I sent you?"
Yeah,
they're gonna listen, so they don't have that awkward, "Oh, I didn't listen."
And if they're not, and they're listening to this now, then they will.
Yeah.
So, if you'd like to get in touch with us just be more connected with the whole church as a podcast, chat with us on our Discord. The link should be in the show notes. Get in there, bug us, ask us questions. You can do anything except type at everyone. You'll get banned for that. I'll ban you.
I know, I did it, and I got banned. You can only talk to TJ on there.
It's just me.
No, also, again, I am actually kind of proud of some of these new shirt designs. I think people should check them out. And they're comfort color t-shirts. If you guys like those shirts, check it out. It's worth it. If for no other reason than like sometimes it can be expensive to get a comfort color shirt.
Mm-hmm. And I will say Josh is pretty effectively marketing blind and deaf. So he's really done a great job with these recent designs.
Yeah. Also check out the other shows on the Unresolved Podcast Network. Also with fun merch, Systematic Ecology. TJ and I are both on that. You can occasionally, when I remember to update, listen to Will on the homily. With Pastor Chill Will. And of course, Brandon Knight has Kung Fu Pizza Party, and who doesn't like Kung Fu Pizza and shorter podcast? I think everybody loves that.
Yeah. Imagine having a shorter podcast. So we hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we're going to be talking with Brian Recker about his book Hellbent and the dangers of bad theology around the doctrine of hell. After that, we'll be talking with Dr. Peter Beck about his upcoming book on his own personal journey of faith and PTSD. It's called The Dark Night of the Soul. After that, we're going to be having Dr. Ernest Lucas, a biblical scholar and the vice principal emeritus of Bristol Baptist College. Join us to discuss the books of Daniel and Proverbs in the Bible and their relevance for church unity in our modern times. And then we'll be having a conversation with Pastor Will Rose Ryan Does, and Josh Patterson about cursing, cussing, swearing, and telling dirty jokes.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're going to be doing all of that.
Yeah, we're going to be doing all those things.
I think that's the...
And by we, I mean definitely.
I would say
Ryan
at
Does.
least Jay Patty. Yeah, Ryan and Josh actually probably will do all of those.
Most certainly will do those things. So at the end of season 1, Francis Chan's going to be on the show. Something to look forward to. Might
He doesn't
happen
know
one
about
day.
it, so someone should probably tell him. It won't be us, but someone should tell him, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might be useful, perhaps. Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, you can always sponsor our efforts to educate and unite the church on Captivate, Patreon, or Apple Podcast. If you're not into the subscription thing, again, you can leave a one-time tip on our Captivate website down below in the description notes. Thank you again, and please come back next week.